The morning I handed Luca Moretti my resignation, he stood in his marble kitchen surrounded by men who moved mountains at his whisper, and he asked me what it would take to make me stay. More money. A car. A house by the lake. I watched the most feared man in the city offer me everything he could think of, everything except the one thing I truly wanted, because he had no idea I wanted him. I was his chubby cook, the woman who remembered his coffee and made his silent house feel warm, and I believed that was all I could ever be to a man like him. What I never expected was that the mafia boss everyone feared had been falling for me for months. This is how I almost walked away from the love of my life because I thought I was useful, not lovable. My name is Amelie Hart, and for most of my 32 years, I was the woman everyone appreciated and nobody chose. I grew up as the capable one in my family, the girl who cooked Sunday dinner by the time she was 15, who remembered every birthday, who fixed every crisis with a casserole and a calm voice. People loved having me around. I just rarely felt like anyone looked at me and saw a woman they desired. That feeling followed me into adulthood. I spent 6 years as a sous chef at Vetro, one of the most celebrated restaurants in the city, where I built half the menu and watched Chef Armand take the credit with a smile. Then Daniel, my boyfriend of 3 years, ended things over a dinner I had cooked, calling me the most dependable person he had ever known. Dependable. He said it like a compliment. I heard it like a verdict. So when the listing appeared, private chef, estate residence, salary nearly triple what Vetro paid, I applied the same day. I had a plan, 2 years of saving, and I would finally open Hart's Table, my dream, a 12-seat dining studio where strangers would sit at one long table and eat whatever I believed in that week. The job was just a means to an end. At least that was what I told myself. The interview happened at the estate itself, a stone villa above Larchmont Lake, about 40 minutes outside the city. Marisol, the housekeeper who ran the household with soft eyes and an iron memory, walked me through the rules in a careful voice. Mr. Moretti valued privacy, valued punctuality. Nobody approached Mr. Moretti without a reason. He's not cruel, she said, straightening a vase that didn't need straightening. He's just precise. About everything. I met him that same afternoon. Luca Moretti was 38, tall, dark-eyed, and so composed he made the room feel like it was holding its breath. Called him a hospitality investor. The staff called him the boss in a tone that meant something older and heavier than hotels. He looked at my resume for 5 seconds, then at me. You cook. I eat. I doubt we'll need to see much of each other. Perfect, I said. I wasn't planning to be decorative. Something flickered in his expression, gone too fast to name. The last chef was decorative, he said. She plated foam and called it dinner. I told him I didn't do foam. He almost smiled, or maybe I imagined it, and then he was gone, and Marisol let out a breath like she had been holding it since March. That was how I became the private chef of a man the whole city was afraid. The household ran like a Swiss watch. Security at the gates, deliveries inspected, staff who lowered their voices when his car came up the drive. I noticed things, because noticing is what chefs do. I noticed that Dante, the head of security, never sat down until Luca did, that nobody joked in the hallways, and that Luca Moretti, for all his power, ate most of his meals alone at a table built for 12. I refused to be intimidated, mostly because I had decided he was just a man with a big house and a lonely dinner table. When he sent back word that the fish was excellent, I sent back word that I had noted his approval and framed it. Marisol looked horrified. Luca appeared in the kitchen doorway that evening, studied me for a long moment, and said, "You talk back." "Only when I'm right," he said, plating his dessert. He took the plate, and I could have sworn the corner of his mouth moved. The coffee thing happened in my second week. I noticed he came downstairs at 6:40 every morning, and that he drank his coffee black, 1 sugar, standing by the east window while he read overnight reports on his phone. So one morning I simply had it ready, exactly right at exactly 6:39. He stared at the cup, then at me. "How did you know?" "It's my job to know what the people they feed want before they ask," I said. "That's not service. That's just paying attention." He didn't answer that. But I caught him watching me over the rim of the cup, and something about the way he looked at me like I was a problem he couldn't quite file under any category he owned made my hands busy and my face warm. I told myself it was nothing. Powerful men notice things. That was all. I went back to my stock and pretended my pulse belonged to the simmer. Around that time the incident with Pietro happened. Pietro was 19, a kitchen porter saving for culinary school, and one evening he dropped a tray of crystal glasses meant for Luca's business dinner. Dante was already walking over, and Pietro had gone white because people did not get second chances in that house. I stepped in before anyone spoke. That tray was overloaded. "I loaded it," I said, which was a lie. "If anyone apologizes to your guests tonight, Mr. Moretti, it should be me." The room went quiet. Luca looked at me, then at the shattered crystal, then at Pietro, who was staring at me like I had just stepped in front of a train for him. "Then it's settled," Luca said finally. Nobody apologizes for an accident. Pietro, help her clean it up. He walked out. Pietro whispered that nobody had ever done that for him. I didn't know Luca had paused in the hallway, or that he had heard every word. After that night, things shifted in small ways I didn't understand yet. Luca started appearing in the kitchen while I worked. At first it was plausible excuses, reviewing the week's menus, asking about suppliers, checking on a dinner for guests. Then the excuses ran out, and he simply came anyway, loosening his tie, sitting at the small prep table in the corner, reading his phone, or just watching the steam rise off whatever I was making. I read all of it, of course. I assumed a man like Luca Moretti liked to supervise his investments, and I was technically one of them. You know the kitchen report goes to Marisol? I told him one evening, without looking up from the risotto. I'm not here for a report, he said. Then why are you here? He was quiet for so long I finally glanced over. He was watching my hands on the wooden spoon. The rest of the house is loud, he said. This is the only room that isn't. The opinion question came in my second month. Tell me honestly, he said one night, sliding a folder across the prep table. It was the concept for his new flagship, a Hotel Vittoria white tablecloth, gold details, a menu designed by committee to offend no one. I read it while my sauce reduced. Then I told him the truth. It's expensive, and it's empty. Anyone with money can eat here and feel nothing. You've built a room for people to be seen, not a table people will remember. He was silent. I immediately wondered whether telling a mafia boss his dream project had no soul qualified as a career-ending move. Then he closed the folder. Everyone else told me it was brilliant, he said. Everyone else is afraid of you. And you're not? I finally looked at him. I'm afraid of bland food. Everything else is negotiable. He laughed, actually laughed, a low, startled sound I suspected the house had never heard. After that, he brought me questions. Not often, and never framed as anything personal. What did I think of a wine program? A rooftop restaurant? A chef he was considering? I answered honestly every time, even when honesty cost him his enthusiasm, and he never once pushed back. He just listened, like he was memorizing the shape of my opinions. The cocoa thing happened in month 3. I had mentioned once, exactly once, that after a long service I drank terrible instant cocoa, the cheap kind from my student days, because it tasted like surviving exams at culinary school. A week later, a tin of it appeared on my shelf in the pantry, the exact brand, imported, nearly impossible to find locally. I asked Marisol. She shrugged with suspicious innocence. When I thanked Luca, he only said he mentioned it, as if that explained why a man like him would remember. I dismissed it. I was very good at dismissing things. Men like Luca Moretti noticed details the way hawks notice field mice. It meant nothing personal. Besides, I knew my casting in the world of women, the soft, round, dependable one, the friend, the listener, the one men called wonderful right before falling for somebody else. Then the gala invitation arrived. Moretti Hospitality Group hosted an annual investors' evening at the Hotel Vittoria, and that year for the first time, senior household staff were invited. A gesture, Marisol said, that had never happened before. I stared at the heavy cream envelope and felt every old insecurity wake up at once. A ballroom full of beautiful, sharp-eyed people in tailored dresses, and me, the chubby cook, standing near the kitchen doors wondering if I smelled like shallots. I almost declined. I was composing excuses in my head when Luca found me in the pantry, turning the invitation over in my hands. He didn't say I would look beautiful, or that I had nothing to worry about, or any of the hollow things people say. He just asked, do you actually want to go? Not should you. Not will you. Just did I want to. Nobody had ever asked me that question in quite that way. I don't know, I admitted. Rooms like that weren't built for people like me. He considered that with the seriousness he gave to contracts. The room will be full of people who bought their way in, he said. You'll be the only one who earned her invitation. It wasn't flattery. It was simply devastatingly factual, and it steadied me more than any compliment could have. I bought a deep green dress that made me feel like a forest, and I went. The gala was everything I had feared. Marble, chandeliers, champagne, and women who looked carved rather than born. I lasted 11 minutes before Valentina Greco, an investor elegant as a knife, pressed her empty glass into my hand. Still white, thank you, she said, already turning away. She had assumed I was staff. And the terrible thing, the thing I hated myself for, was that some tired part of me agreed with her. Of course I was the help. Look at me. I reached for the glass. Valentina. Luca's voice arrived before his hand did, and both were calm in a way that made people nearby go still. You've mistaken his heart for the waitstaff. He took the glass from my fingers and set it on a passing tray without looking. Amelie Hart, he said, turning to face the small circle that had gathered, is the finest chef in the city, and she is my guest tonight. He said my name like it belonged in that room. like it had always belonged. I should have felt rescued. Instead, I felt exposed because I knew I was sure I knew why he had done it. I was his employee and Luca Moretti protected what belonged to his house. It was about appearances, authority, pride. It wasn't about me. That was what I told myself through dessert. While across the table, Luca watched me with an expression I refused to read. He drove me home himself, which Dante clearly disapproved of. Halfway down the lake road, Luca said without preamble, "You were angry tonight." I was embarrassed. Because of Valentina? Because she saw exactly what I am. The words came out before I could stop them. The car went quiet. "And what are you, Amy?" he asked finally. It was the first time he had ever used my first name. "Yours," I wanted to say, and the wanting frightened me so much that I said, "Your chef," instead. Something moved through his face, frustration, maybe, or something softer, losing an argument. "Is that really what you think tonight was?" he asked. "You introduced your chef," I said lightly, because lightness was my oldest armor. It was kind. "Your staff will talk about it for weeks." He didn't answer. He just drove, jaw-tight hands at 10 and 2, and I had the strange feeling I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. A week later, he asked me to stay for dinner. Not to cook it, to stay for it. He had Pietro and me prepare the meal together, and then he dismissed everyone, and it was just the two of us at the long table with too much distance between the chairs, eating my braised lamb like two people pretending this was normal. "You're not my chef tonight," he said, when I automatically reached to clear his plate. "Tonight you're company." My heart did something medically inadvisable. We talked for 3 hours. Not about menus or hotels. About his grandmother, who had taught him that a table could hold a family together better than any surname. About my grandmother, whose apricot crostata was the reason I became a chef. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. When I finally looked at the time, it was past midnight, and I stood in that candlelit dining room and thought, with genuine terror, "Does he actually like me?" I did the sensible thing. I went back to my cottage and made a list of every rational explanation. He was lonely. He was bored. I was novel, the one person in his orbit who wasn't afraid of him, and novelty fades. Men like Luca Moretti collected beautiful, slender, and troubled women. They did not fall for their chubby cooks. Then I lay awake until 3, replaying the way he had said my name. Luca's world noticed me before I noticed noticing. At a small dinner he hosted for his closest circle, Enzo, his cousin and advisor, a few old family friends, I was invited as a guest for the second time. I caught the looks, the raised brows when Luca pulled out my chair, the tiny smiles exchanged over wine glasses. Enzo, silver-tongued and watchful, asked where I had served before. The word was chosen precisely. Served. As in, my place. Later on the terrace, I overheard 2 of the wives discussing me in the comfortable tones of people certain his staff couldn't hear. "She's sweet," one said. But really? The cook? Luca's just enjoying the novelty. Men get sentimental about the people who feed them. I stood in the dark with my glass and let the words land exactly where they were aimed, right in the oldest bruise I owned. Because the worst part was that I didn't think they were wrong. I was slipping away toward the kitchen, my natural habitat, my hiding place, when Luca's voice stopped the entire terrace. Someone had made a joke, light and poisonous, about staff fraternization. Luca set down his glass. "Emily sits at my table because I want her there," he said quietly, without anger, which made it land harder than shouting ever could. If that's a problem for anyone, the door works both ways. Nobody spoke. And instead of feeling protected, I felt terrified. Because that was the moment I finally stopped lying to myself. Walking home under the lake stars, I admitted it, I had fallen for him. Not his house, not his name, not the fairy tale idea of him. The man who asked my opinion and meant it, who noticed when I was tired, who laughed like the sound surprised him every time. I was in love with my employer, a man from a world that would never see me as anything but the help. There was no version of this that ended safely. And underneath the fear sat the older wound, the one Daniel had left and years of being wonderful had salted. What if it wasn't me he wanted at all? What if he wanted the warm kitchen, the ready coffee, the woman who made his hard life softer? Comfort is not desire. Being needed is not being chosen. I had spent my whole life being needed, and it had never once kept anyone. If I stayed, I would hand him my heart and call it employment, and one day the novelty would end, and I would not survive it politely. I decided in one night and mourned for 3. Then I opened my savings statements, pulled up the listing I had bookmarked months earlier, a narrow brick space on Fournier Street with a Beaufront window and a wreck of a kitchen, and did the math. I had almost enough. If I was ever going to build Hart's table, it had to be now, before I talked myself into staying forever as the most beloved appliance in Luca Moretti's house. I resigned on a Tuesday morning, 6 months in. He was in the kitchen, he was always in the kitchen then drinking the coffee I had made out of pure, treacherous habit. "I'm giving my notice," I said. 2 weeks. I'll train whoever you hire." He went completely still. Luca Moretti did not move like other men. When something hit him, everything in him stopped at once. Why? He said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand wrapped in a whisper. I had prepared reasons. But he stood there looking at me like I was a negotiation he hadn't seen coming, and the truth came out instead. Because I'm starting to love you, I said. And I can't keep working for a man I'm in love with. I can't spend my life wondering whether you want me or whether you want what I do for you. So I'm leaving before this breaks something in me I can't fix. The silence lasted a year. This was the moment I had braced for, the part where he refused, insisted, arranged. Men like Luca didn't lose employees, they retained assets. He could double my salary with a phone call and rebuild my studio dream out of petty cash. What will it take, he said at last, to change your mind? Money. A car. The building on Fournier Street, I know about it. I can have it purchased by Friday. Of course he knew about it. He was Luca Moretti. That's exactly why I have to go, I said softly. You just offered to buy my dream so I'd stay close enough to keep making your coffee. You don't even know you're doing it. He stared at me and I watched something move through him, anger first, then something much worse. Understanding. He set the cup down with terrible care. If leaving is what you need, he said, then leave. No pressure, no conditions. It was the kindest, cruelest thing he could have done. I had expected a battle. I had rehearsed for persuasion, for charm, for the full weight of his will. Instead, he stepped aside and opened the door of his own house, and somehow that undid me more than any argument could have. Because I realized, standing there with my resignation shaking in my hand, that part of me had wanted him to fight, and he had chosen to respect me instead. I didn't understand yet what that cost him. I would, eventually. My last 2 weeks were polite agony. He stopped coming to the kitchen. The house felt like it had been turned down, volume and light both. Pietro cornered me by the ovens and asked, in a cracked voice, if it was because of the crystal thing. I hugged him and told him it was because I had a dream to build. On my last day, Marisol pressed a folder into my hands, every recipe I had made there, photocopied. So you don't lose them, she said. Luca wasn't there when I left. I told myself I was glad. Dante walked me to the gate. Dante, who I was fairly sure disapproved of my entire existence as a security liability, and said stiffly, he hasn't eaten properly since Tuesday. I didn't turn around. He has 3 restaurants, he said. Feeding him was never my real job. No, Dante said, in the tone of a man saying more than he should. We know. I got in the taxi and did not look back at the house on the lake. Fournier Street swallowed the next month whole. The building was worse than the photos, dead wiring, a 40-year-old grease trap, a floor that sloped like a funhouse. I signed the lease anyway, took out a small loan that made my bank manager sigh, and spent October in paint clothes, sanding the long maple table that would be the heart of Hart's table. 12 seats, 1 menu, candles. It was going to be beautiful or it was going to bankrupt me, and on the good days I believed the first one. He found me 3 weeks after I left on a rainy Thursday, standing outside my dusty window with no umbrella and no entourage. Just Luca, in a dark coat, looking at my crooked floor like it had personally offended him. You're not my employer anymore, I said through the door before he could speak. I know, he said. That's why I came. Have dinner with me and leave. Not an interview. Not a negotiation. Dinner. I said no. It came out fast and hard, and I watched it hit him, watched him absorb a refusal, possibly one of the first of his adult life, without reaching for a single lever of power. He just nodded, rain gathering in his hair. All right, he said. I'll ask again. And he did. Every week after that, rain or shine, no flowers, no gifts, no pressure. Just the question, delivered with a patience I didn't know he possessed. He came the 5th week with 2 coffees and questions instead of an invitation. He stood under my half-finished awning and asked about the studio, really asked. The concept, the menu philosophy, the 12-seat table, and why 12. I answered warily at first, and less warily then for an hour, because nobody had ever asked me about my dream as if it were a serious thing. Daniel had called it cute. Armand had called it quaint. Luca took notes on a napkin, and I hated how much that moved me. After that, the questions kept coming, and they were never about what I could do for him. What did I eat when nobody was watching? Roast chicken with too much lemon, eaten standing up. Where did I want to travel? Lisbon, for the tiled bakeries. What did I want my life to look like at 50? I told him things I had never said out loud, standing in the sawdust of my own dream, while the most powerful man I knew listened like my answers were the only reports that had ever mattered. It was around week 7 that he told me the truth about himself, the part the newspapers circled but never printed. We were sitting on paint buckets after dark. My family built things the old way, he said quietly. Control first, everything else after. I've spent 10 years moving us into businesses with windows. He looked at his hands. I was taught that safety is something you arrange. Loyalty is something you arrange. I have arranged everything in my life. You are the first thing I cannot arrange. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, and a man like Luca Moretti saying those words was worth more than diamonds. I can make 100 phone calls and move a harbor. I cannot make you choose. I lie awake being outraged by that. He almost smiled. My whole life, wanting something meant taking the steps to have it. You are not something to be had. I'm still learning what you are. Nobody had ever been that honestly helpless about me before. I didn't give in. That matters. It's my whole life I had been the easy one, the accommodating one, and I refused to be that woman with him. So we built something slower. He never touched me without asking with his eyes first. He never used the word us before I did. When my contractor quit, he didn't send his own crew. He asked if I wanted a recommendation, accepted my no without flickering, and came back the next day with sandwiches and a list I was free to ignore. I fell harder in those weeks than in all the months at the estate, because this Luca, the one standing in sawdust, learning the names of my suppliers, asking my fishmonger's opinion and actually waiting for it, was not collecting me. He was courting me clumsily and carefully, the way strong men handle things they are afraid of breaking. And God help me, I wanted to be chosen so badly that I almost forgot to check whether I was. Which brings me to the night I almost ruined everything. It was December. Pietro called me panicking. Luca was hosting his family's winter dinner, the first since I had left, and the new chef had walked out that morning. Pietro begged me to come teach him the crostetta recipe my grandmother used to make, the one I had promised him months earlier. Against my better judgment, I went. Just the kitchen, I told myself. Just Pietro. I was leaving through the side hall when I heard Luca's voice behind the half-open study door, low and tired, talking to Enzo. And Enzo said, "You could just hire her back. Double it. Triple it." And Luca answered, "No, you don't understand. The house was different when Amelie was here. Calmer. Happier. Everyone felt it. I need that again." I stood frozen in the hallway with my folder of recipes against my chest, and every old wound I owned opened at once. I need that. Not her. That. The calm. The comfort. The warm kitchen and the ready coffee and the woman who made his hard house soft. Enzo said something I didn't stay to hear, because I was already moving out the side door into the cold, with 32 years of evidence arranging itself into a verdict. He missed what I did for him. All those evenings, all those questions, he was just rehiring the feeling, not loving the woman. I had almost believed otherwise. That was the part that hurt the most. I stopped answering. His calls went to voicemail. His weekly question went unasked and unanswered because I stopped opening the door on Thursdays. I threw myself into the studio, painting until midnight, sanding until my shoulders burned. Pietro texted that Luca was asking about me, and I didn't answer that either. Then I turned off my phone and cried into a bag of flour. He came on the 8th day, in the middle of a snow flurry, and he didn't knock. He stood outside my bow-front window until I looked up, and then he just stood there, snow gathering on his shoulders, and waited. You have to understand, this was a man who summoned senators. And he stood on Fournier Street in the snow like a man with no power at all, because in this one thing he had finally understood he had none. I let him in because my hands were shaking too hard to hold the sander anyway. "You heard something," he said. No preamble. "Pietro told me you were at the house. Enzo told me what we discussed. I've spent a week reconstructing what you must have heard me say, and I've come to tell you what you didn't stay to hear." I folded my arms. "You said the house was calmer when I was there, that you need that again. I know what I am to you, Luca. I'm the warm kitchen. I'm not blaming you. I just finally believe it. You heard me describe the house," he said. "You didn't stay for what I told Enzo next." He took one step closer and stopped, as if there were a line only I could move. I told him the calm was never the house. It was you. I told him I don't miss my chef because I have hired 4 chefs, and the kitchen still smells right, and none of it helps. His voice did something I had never heard from it before. It shook. "I miss the woman who made me want to come home." "You want to know when it started?" he said. "Not the coffee. Not the meals. It was the night you lied for a 19-year-old boy and faced down my entire house to do it. It was you telling me my flagship hotel had no soul when men with decades on me were too frightened to be honest. It was you actually laughing at my terrible joke about the sommelier instead of pretending I was impressive. I kept inventing reasons to enter that kitchen. There was no reason. There was only you. And the weight thing," he said, and I flinched because he had apparently read the exact inscription on my oldest wound. "I have watched you apologize with your shoulders for taking up space my whole house was lucky to you occupy. I don't know who taught you that, but I need you to hear this once clearly." He waited until I looked at him. I did not fall for what fits in a chair, Amelie. I fell for the person in it. all of her, exactly as she is. I want to tell you I melted into his arms. I didn't. I stood in my sawdust and cried like a burst pipe, and he stood exactly where he was, because he had learned me well enough to know that in that moment, being held mattered less than being heard. When I could finally speak, I said the truest thing I had. I have spent my whole life being loved for what I do. I don't actually know how to be loved for who I am. You're going to have to be patient while I learn. I have been patient for 7 months, he said, and the ghost of his almost smile finally broke through. I can be patient a while longer. But I am asking properly one time. No job between us, no house, no kitchen. Amelie Hart. Have dinner with me. As the woman I love, with the man who loves her. If the answer is no, I will accept it and grieve like a civilized man. I laughed through the tears. You've never been civilized a day in your life, he said. No, he agreed. But for you, I'm learning. I said yes. And then, because I was still me, I said yes with conditions. We go slowly. I open my studio on my savings, my loan, my name on the lease. You don't buy the building, you don't fix my floor, you don't make one phone call that smooths one thing. He opened his mouth, he raised a finger. You can be a customer, Luca. You can sit at my table and pay full price like everyone else. If you want to be in my life, you enter my world this time. I'm done living in yours. He agreed so fast, I got suspicious, and then I understood. It wasn't surrender, it was relief. Nobody had ever handed Luca Moretti terms that came from love instead of fear. He kept every single one. When the inspectors dragged their feet, he sat on his hands. When my oven died a week before opening, he actually asked before lending me the name of a repairman. And every Thursday, he sat at the wobbly work table in the middle of my construction site and ate whatever I was testing and told me the truth about it. There was one exception, and it undid me completely. 3 weeks before opening, he arrived with flour on his cuff flour and asked me to teach him the apricot crostata. Luca Moretti, whose family name made harbors hold their breath, stood in my little kitchen and mangled pastry dough with the grave concentration of a man diffusing something. It took him 4 attempts. He served me the 4th with both hands and said, "You have fed me for a year. I wanted to know what it costs you. It costs a lot." That was the night I stopped being afraid of him. The last 2 months of building became, without either of us naming it, the happiest season of my life. For a year I had learned him. Now he was learning me, preference by preference, the way I had once memorized his coffee. Blood oranges appeared on my counter the week I mentioned loving them. The cocoa tin on my studio shelf never emptied. He tried once disastrously to roast me a lemon chicken, and I ate every oversalted bite like it was a tasting menu. Hart's table opened on the last Friday of February. 12 seats, 1 long maple table, candles, and a menu built around everything my grandmother ever taught me. The city's toughest food critic came uninvited and left converted. But the reservation I kept checking the door for was the 8 o'clock single seat end of the table, Bill Moretti. He arrived on time, alone in a simple dark suit, with no entourage and no flowers to upstage the room, and took his seat like any man hoping to be fed. I watched him from the kitchen pass all evening, this man who owned ballrooms, sitting at my 12-seat table in my little brick building, passing the bread basket to a stranger, complimenting the anniversary couple beside him. He did not control the room, he was simply wholly there, my guest, in my world, exactly as I had asked. And somewhere between the crostata and the coffee, I felt the last locked door inside me swing quietly open. Because I finally understood the thing that had taken me 32 years and one mafia boss to learn. I had spent my whole life believing people loved what I did for them because that was the only love I had ever been offered, and I had mistaken the offering for my worth. But my worth was never in his serving. Daniel hadn't left because I was too soft or too round or too much. He had left because he couldn't see me. Luca saw me. More importantly, I had finally learned to see myself. Valentina Greco booked a table in our 2nd month. I seated her myself, accepted her quiet apology for a gala long past, and compared her dessert because my grandmother believed nobody should leave your table feeling smaller than when they arrived. When I told Luca, he was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is exactly what I fell in love with. After the last guest left that opening night, he stayed, of course, drying glasses at my sink like he had been born to it. You didn't eat the crostata, I said. I was saving room, he said, to ask the chef to dinner. I hear she's extraordinary. I laughed, and it came out wet. She's also kissing the man in seat 12 after closing, I said. Completely unprofessional of her. Seat 12 has never respected professionalism, he said, and kissed me in my own kitchen, in my own world, under my own name. That was a year ago. Hart's table has a waiting list. Now in a 2nd table I refused to add, because 12 seats was the dream, and the dream wasn't for sale. Luca taught me that dreams hold their value when you defend them, though he will tell you he learned it from me. He still comes every Thursday. He still asks questions and waits for the answers. And on slow nights, after closing we cook together, and he still can't make pastry, and I no longer make his coffee. He makes mine. People still ask how a woman like me ended up with a man like him, and I know exactly what they mean by a woman like me. I smile and let them wonder, because I know what they don't. The feared man on the lake didn't fall for the cook. He fell for the woman who talked back, who shielded the powerless, who told him the truth, who laughed at his jokes and refused his money and made him earn a seat at her table. He fell for me. The chubby part was never the obstacle. It was never even the point. I was his chubby cook. I never expected the Mafia Boss to fall for me. But the truest surprise of my life wasn't Luca Moretti standing in my sawdust learning that love can't be arranged. It was this. I didn't become lovable when he chose me. I had been lovable the whole time, peaceful, yes, but also brilliant and funny, and worthy of being wanted exactly as I am. He just happened to be the first man observant enough to notice. And I was the first version of myself brave enough to finally believe him.